Hi and welcome to a deck tech video for the Gruul commander Etali, Primal Conqueror. It is not one of the most popular commanders, but we still have a total of 64 tournament entries with it. And that means that we're starting to be able to say something from data statistics, a little bit. But I would like to emphasize that it's not huge, so you should probably look or view this video as a look into Etali, how things have been working for it so far. So this video in the end will give you a form of decent understanding and a little bit recommendation of card choices, a tiny bit. But I would like to start talking a little bit about the average win rate you see up there, 19.86. Below it you see plus 1.82. That is a calculation from the start of this year. So it's actually been growing a little bit in power level, or growing in win rate. And over time, as more Etali tournament entries will happen, we will see if this is a trend that keeps going, or if it's going down or up, or how it develops. It's all depending on the meta in general and decks it's going up against. I don't often mention the average draw rate. You see, in tournament games you can win, you can lose, or you can draw, meaning no one actually won. And this is 13.36. I would like to show you this commander. This is Talion the Kindly Lord with a lower win rate compared to Etali. Now, if we're gonna be completely honest, the difference between 19 to 17 isn't that big. So in the end, I'm actually going to say that both Talion and Etali have something of the similar win rate, especially considering that Etali only had 64 tournament entries, while this one has 219. So this is a much popular commander, but it's performing a micromillimeter worse. But look at that draw rate. That is where we're seeing a huge difference. So Talion is clearly drawing a lot of games, and we can clearly see that because it's a control commander that, in my opinion, kind of struggles a tiny bit at actually winning the game. So this commander might be interacting too much, but failing in getting it there themselves. In contrast to this, that is more like a turbo-orientated commander, more or less. There are other similar commanders to Etali in its kinda core. Corvold the Fake Cursed King is also sitting on a pretty equal win rate to Etali, but also a very low draw rate. I mean, Corvold is not famous for being very interactive, but it's kinda famous for trying to win the game once Corvold comes into play. And Etali truly is one of those commanders that could theoretically win once it hits the battlefield, because you are potentially getting a clone of it to get a secondary trigger, if you're lucky, and that big "if you're lucky" is a big thing. Now, if we actually take a look at an Etali decklist, looking at the most recent, with something that won 25%, 1 win and 3 losses. We're seeing something like 42 creatures, we have 5 sorceries, 10 instants, 9 artifacts, 7 enchantments and 26 lands. Some key creatures are Treasonous Ogre, Wandering Archaic, Tamer Sabertooth, Dockside, no Cloudstone Courier in this version, and there you go, Food Chain, together with Eternal Scourge, and here is Squee the Immortal. Now, with Food Chain and one of these two creatures you can make infinite mana, and that means you can cast your Etali infinitely. And the same thing with Tamer Sabertooth, Dockside and Cloudstone Courier. You make infinite mana with Dockside and one of these two other cards, and they also include infinite ETB triggers, so you can have infinite ETB Etali and win the match by casting everyone's entire library. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Looking at this kind of statistics comes later. Let's begin by looking at some individual cards. Cards that wouldn't be recommended, that have a very big drop in the actual win rate. What I mean by that is this. Now, I would like to say that the inclusion rate here is not that big, and by the way, I want to mention something more. As I have been continuously asking for feedback, I have been getting some. And for you who are data analyst statistics people who are knowing what I'm talking about right now, I've been using a t-test, but in the future I'm planning on using a she test, which is better. as I've learned. And once again, thank you for the feedback. Updates and improvements are taking place. And by the way, as I'm usually saying this at the end of the video, I might as well say it now. If you have any suggestions for potential improvements of this kind of video, where we're looking into tournament data and trying to get a good understanding, please leave a comment below and I will try to look into it and see if I can potentially upgrade and make this video content better. What I'm saying with that is don't trust that result is statistically significant. According to a t-test it is, but according to a sheet test it might not be. But what we can take away from this is that those 6 decks that have entered into tournaments haven't really performed so good with Collector Oof, which may mean nothing. However, if you look at the pie chart, you see an inclusion rate of 9.4%, which is a very low inclusion rate. So people who are mostly entering into tournaments with Etali are not playing Collector Oof. So instead of looking at the data, or well, we are looking at the people's choice, so to say here, and people seem to be opting away from it. So to emphasize, not according to win rate, but according to what people choose to do, according to their player experience, they are not choosing Collector Oof, and that makes sense because you wanna ritual out Etali as fast as possible, and this will stop that. Another not so recommended card, Final Fortune. This is actually seeing a little bit more action, but still a low inclusion rate kinda. I can actually see why this is not so popular, because if you're playing Etali and you cast this and Etali is once again very random. If you cast this and you don't win that turn, you pass to your next Final Fortune turn and you don't win that turn, because once again Etali is quite random, you lose the game. So it's not something optimal to flip into with an Etali. Like imagine casting Etali very early in the game and you kinda all in it and you don't really have a good way of like getting a secured secondary Etali and you flip into this. Do you really want to cast Final Fortune? Usually not. Now Final Fortune is usually a very good card in most other decks, but it might not fit here. Similar with Defense Grid. Here we have a win rate of 15.38 and we actually have a pretty big inclusion rate of it. We have 35.9% who have included it, but a drop of 4.48. So that's a big drop compared to the total average. You can actually see the total average of all 64 decks just below the draw rate, average win rate 19.86. And I think that the reason is very simple and clean. It's similar to how Final Fortune works. Once again, Etali is very random. You cast a Folly, you flip into Defense Grid, and you cast Defense Grid and you pass turn because you weren't lucky enough to win that turn. Now you're giving away a defense grid for your opponents. That's bad. So maybe you could play this, but sometimes if you're feeling uncertain that you're not gonna win, try and not cast it. Or basically skip casting it with your Etali. But on the other hand, if you're having it in the deck, it's also going to decrease the chance of making your Etali combo flow and make that victory on the first single Etali cast. In contrast, I know we're gonna talk about cards with a low win rate, but as we're talking about the defense grid, we can just flip and look at Conqueror's Flail. As long as Conqueror's Flail is attached to a creature, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. This is not a Grand Abolisher to your opponent. It's the complete opposite. It's actually showing a very good performance though. Now we have 26.6 inclusion and we have a 26.25 average win rate, an increase by 6.39. That's good. Seems to be recommended. Back to the not so recommended cards, Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker. Now some of you are gonna say, but wait, he's great, he's a clone for Etali. However, put a token that's a copy of target non-legendary creature you control onto the battlefield, so it doesn't work. It only works if you're making infinite of that Kiki-Jiki combo, so to say. But as you can see here, it's not really making a good fit. The inclusion rate is quite low, and it's having a drastic measure to your overall performance. The takeaway is that it might be better to just focus on making your Etali Storm work better than including this. Infernal Plunge actually surprised me a lot. So for 1 red mana and sacrifice your Etali, you gain 3 red mana. This is very key in your Etali Storm, because you're sending Etali back to your command zone and you can recast Etali using the mana from this. However, some reason it doesn't seem to be popular. You should ignore the win rate, and as well, result is not statistically significant even with my t-test. But as you can see, people aren't really opting for this strategy at all. So there you go. While we are on the topic of sacrificing Etali, this one surprised me a lot. So apparently only one deck have played Greater Good, and I thought Greater Good was going to be something of an almost auto-include for Etali. Sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, which is pretty big with Etali's very high power, and then discard 3 cards, which is fine considering you basically drew 7 here. But apparently no one is playing it, and I'm surprised about that. And like I said in the beginning of the video, I'm more showcasing a directive what people are choosing to do, rather than looking at the core statistics here. And I think it's very important to just get a look at what the Etali players are choosing to do. So clearly they are not choosing this, for some reason, that I actually don't know why. If you know why, feel free to leave a comment as an Etali player. Let's switch things up and start looking into good cards. Cards that would be recommended, or cards that are boosting the win rate a bunch. First one out I really want to highlight is a land, City of Traitors. If you play a land, sacrifice City of Traitors. That's bad, but tap it, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Now we have the perfect 50-50 split. Basically we have divided the entire Etali group into 2 groups. One group that is playing City of Traitors and the other group that is not playing City of Traitors, and we can compare the results from these 2 groups, and here you can see an increase by 3.27% to the average win rate group including this, saying that it's a recommended card. If you don't understand why, I can clearly explain that it's all about the opening hands. If you have a City of Traitors and a second land in your hand, you can play City of Traitors turn 1 with a Fellor Stone still turn 1. This means that on turn 2 you can play a land and boost up to 4 mana. And if you have Treasonous Ogre, you have an Etali turn 2. For example, Ancient Tomb, the better version of City of Traitors, is already auto-included more or less. And the more and more you look into rituals, the more and more clear picture you actually get. Now this is something of the difference between the Desperate Ritual and the Infernal Plunge. Here we have to sacrifice a creature, so my speculation is that sometimes Etali decks just don't have a creature to sacrifice into Infernal Plunge. Gemstone Caverns is heavily played by all decks, more or less. Grim Monolith looks like a recommended card. It's also helping you with that City of Traitors. City of Traitors turn 1 into Grim Monolith. On turn 2 you have you have 6 available mana for you, and you're very close to getting your commander into play. So if you have a ritual and some more fast mana on turn 2, you have a turn 2 Etali or a turn 3 Etali with this. Jeska's Will is basically auto-included, so don't look at the win rate, because the win rate is going to be identical to the average win rate more or less, as it's seeing inclusion equal to the grand total. But as everyone is playing this, it is more or less a kind of auto-include, because if everyone is playing it, everyone has the personal experience that this is a good card for you. It's also really good to flip into, by the way, because you have your commander in play and you're getting some mana. Lion's Eye Diamond doesn't really boost up the win rate that much. It's sitting on a 35.9 inclusion rate, so it's kind of popular. It's helping you actually cast your commander quite efficiently, because you have to sacrifice your hand, but you're usually fine. You're mostly playing rituals in this deck, so you're getting there. Sacrificing your hand for casting Etali and casting 4 more cards is usually worth it. And because of that, I guess we should just mention that Jeweled Lotus is, yeah, also an auto-include more or less. Dorks seems to be kinda good and recommended somewhat. So you see here a perfect 50-50, kind of 50-50 split. You have one group playing it, one group that doesn't play it, and the group that is playing it is performing a tiny bit better. But if we're also looking at suddenly Arbor Elf, another dork, we're seeing something of the same patterned result. So turn 1 dorks seems to be okay. But especially if you pair them with the Utopia Sprawl that Arbor Elf can actually, if you touch this to a forest, Arbor Elf can untap it. Same thing with Wild Growth, that is also like a dork version, more or less. I think you can see something of a pattern. The more rituals, the more fast mana, the more ramp, the better. But there are a few that is dropping down. So I didn't mention this during the lower win rate section because I kind of wanted to tune it together with the ritual theme we have going here. Carpet of Flowers is suddenly dropping the win rate. We have that perfect 50-50 split, and the group that is playing Carpet of Flowers is performing weaker compared to the group that is not. The reason I think this is actually dropping in win rate and dropping in like success is that people are playing less islands. The printing of Morphic Pool have helped out a lot for all the blue-black decks and decreasing the island count in general. We're also seeing more and more 5-color decks, and 5-color decks are tuning more towards City of Traitors, Mana Confluence, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Forbidden Orchard, a lot of lands that tap for blue but aren't islands. So when you're looking at this, you should probably question your own meta and how much islands you're usually seeing against your opponents. And in general, overall, that's kinda dropping. So this is not like only looking into Etali, this is looking at Carpet of Flowers kind of in general, and as I've been looking at different commanders now and then here and there and various combinations like this, I've usually seen that Carpet of Flowers is actually starting to like drop in power level. It used to be a very great card and one of my considerations of being some of the best card in the entire format, but that was like 8 years ago. Now besides all the ramp, we also have some other key cards we need to take a look at. Cursed Mirror. This is basically a clone. You're making a copy of your Etali, getting a new trigger, but also a mana rock. We have Twin Flame, heavily played, more or less an auto include. I guess we just should mention Dual Custom Mage in the same case. It's getting a very identical win rate to the total average, actually. Seems to be fine, potentially. Heat Shimmer is sitting with a pretty positive result. Once again, this is a secondary Etali trigger, causing Etali, flipping into Heat Shimmer. Great stuff. Now let's do something fun and look at some really weird and spicy cards to talk about. There are some really fun techs you can do. Now don't look at the actual like inclusion rate, don't look at the result is not statistically significant. Let's ignore that. Let's just talk about the card in general. I'm showcasing everything anyways because you might want to look at it anyways, but Go to the Bandit Warlord is a very interesting card for Etali. Or actually I should say that Helm of the Host is a very interesting card for Etali. If you're wondering why Godo has a better win rate compared to Helm of the Host, if you look at the inclusion here just as an explanation, you can see that Helm of the Host has 10 while Godo has 9. Because Helm of the Host is actually great with Etali. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary. If equipped creature is legendary, the token gains haste. So with this, you're getting a secondary Etali trigger. This is basically just another clone, but it's also like a value card. I mean, you're going to sit there and create a lot of Etalis that can swing for the win. But if you're including Godo, you have a secondary win con inside your deck. A 1-card win con being Godo. And I mean, the deck is entirely focused around like ramping up to a huge mana count. And if you have Godo in your hand and you are able to ritual him out, instead of casting your commander, you can cast Godo, find the Helm and win the match. Compared to looking into Kiki-Jiki, this is actually a card that is individually good on its own inside the deck, and Godo is also just a 1-card win con, while Kiki-Jiki is a 2-card win con. Another card that I definitely think deserves a kinda experiment with, or a highlight, or a mention is Domri, Anarch of Bolas. Now, no one is actually playing this, because no one has really been testing this. But there is something very interesting about this Planeswalker. Add red or green, creature spells you cast this turn can't be countered. That's actually quite good, because once again, we did take a look at Conqueror's Flail doing great stuff for this deck, basically being that Grand Abolisher. Domri is also that kinda Grand Abolisher, but also a ramp, a ritual, or no, sorry, not ritual, far from ritual, and very bad ramp if I'm gonna be honest, but at least it's generating mana for you to cast your commander. But also, target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. If you need to get rid of, let's say, a Draenei Magistrate, you can do that with this. So it's a little bit of an all-around toolbox execution, but the big part is creature spells you cast this turn can't be countered, while also generating mana from it. And then we have this, I couldn't resist. Emrakul of the Promised End have been played by 3 decks total. That's nothing, we can't say anything about its win rate, and the result is definitely not statistically significant, but it is kinda interesting consideration. Once again, the deck is heavily focused around generating a lot of mana, and sometimes this is actually not that expensive, especially if you're playing a few planeswalkers, like Domri. I'm kinda painting a very beautiful picture here, I hope. But sometimes you're paying like 8 or 9 mana for this, or sometimes even 7. And that's kind of the range of the mana we're trying to achieve with this specific commander. And also, if you flip into this, that's kind of good. Whenever you cast Emrakul, gain control of target opponent during that play's next turn. After that, that player takes an extra turn. And you can do some very devastating things with your opponents, usually. I think it's something to consider. Do I think it's something that I recommend? I can't recommend it, but I think it's something to have fun with. The last card I want to showcase is this one. Ian Flannery, comedian from another YouTube channel. Ian, this is not including Ian, this is literally Ian taking Etali into various tournaments, and as you can see, he has been performing quite good with it. And as you can probably guess, as the inclusion rate is 64, and 2 of those are from Ian. He is boosting the entire Etali win rate quite a lot. And there's actually a point I want to try and make here. So the total average of all Etali is 19.86, and suddenly this guy is getting from 2 games 45. Now 2 games is kind of nothing. If Ian were to play this more, I'm just gonna be honest, I think it should drop, so it's something like 30 eventually. But I want to highlight that player skill matters a lot. This guy clearly knows what he's doing in general, because he has a pretty good win rate in general. But I want to highlight a very sad fact, or maybe not something that's gonna sound like an attack on Ian. I don't want it to sound like that, but honestly, there's a lot of people saying, I've been playing this commander and I've been performing really good with it, and I'm winning tournaments, here are my amazing results. And that doesn't mean you're gonna get those results yourself. Because if we're gonna be dead honest, Etali is not performing equal to a lot of other decks out there. If we just take a quick look at something of the potential best deck inside the entire format, we have a 27% win rate. That's a big difference to Etali. So if I'm gonna be dead honest and like a card review for Etali in general, I have to say that it's on the average. It's in the middle ground, or kind of below the middle ground, so to say. It's getting boosted by a few players that really know how to play cEDH in general. There are definitely improvements you can do to the list, like there are some unrecommended cards and there are some recommended cards for you that we have kind of showcased inside this video, hopefully. Now you should definitely play the way and the commander you want to play, but if I have to be honest, it's not a commander that I could truly recommend in general, as there is a lot of commanders that are usually getting a very much better win rate in general, entering into various tournaments. But Etali seems to be on the rise, and I truly believe it's going to climb up a little bit more in win rate, because we are starting to see more and more clone effects. And the more clone effects your opponents are playing, Etali will get stronger from that. So I definitely think that the metagame could be starting to favor Etali a little bit more over time. The better cards your opponents are playing, and the more similar cards you're looking for with your opponents, the better there is, and we're starting to see that more and more. Regardless, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you got something out of this and enjoyed the video. Take care guys, and I'll see you in the next one.